One of the things about doing work in the church is one of the interesting dichotomies or struggles or aspects of doing ministry is understanding the difference between mercy and justice. And if we can grasp the differences between mercy and justice, we can have a better understanding of our churches and our community and our individual impacts on the world. Now, I'm gonna hold them in contrast at some points in this passage in our time together today, but they're not always meant to be in contrast. But there is tension actually between doing mercy and justice. The truth is that congregations and individuals, each one of us have the call to do both, even if when it may be held in tension. And our scripture also asks us to be about and to do both. To do and to act for a just society, and to give and express mercy abundantly. I'm going to lift up two different type of passages in our scriptures or stories in our scriptures to better understand the difference and to hold up the unique ability of each as a call from God. So let's go to the first justice slide here. So let us understand justice, and particularly, this isn't going to be an exhaustive understanding of justice, but try to speak to it as a lens of faith. How does our faith yearn us to be and to live into more just society? How does faith encourage justice between us and God and our neighbors? So justice in the eyes of Scripture is an act of making things right in the world. It's an equilibrium exercise of equity. And making things just means that there will be not equal treatment, but setting up a system that is equitous and has equity as a part of it. An essential ingredient to the flavor of faith is equity. So in the scriptures, in a way that we understand justice from the eyes of scriptures, it's not an act of penalty. Now, we often think justice is like making things right, or the justice system, we call it, like judges and lawyers and all that kind of good stuff. But in the faith, it's an act of a correction. That is, it's not an act of penalty of making a judgment by a judge or receiving something from a jury. It's an act of correction. It's the idea that God wanted it a certain way, God created it in a certain way, and it lost its direction due to sin or whatever it may be, and the thing is broken. And so, in the eyes of faith, justice is an act of correction, not penalty. That's an important understanding here. It's the idea that there was an original understanding of what good order looks like. It broke due to human sin or whatever it may be. It broke and didn't work anymore. And in God, justice means that there is a correction, that things are bent back into justice, that things are bent back into the right way of living. Now, are penalties some ways that happens? You can see that in Scripture. But most of the time, it's just the arc of God's work and act, that things are bent back into God's normal. So justice speaks to systems of oppression, history, and time. Justice, as we know, is a long arc. Justice is a long bent, a journey that God is continually working with us and to us to bend us back into that arc. And so it's not an act of individual guilt or shame to talk about justice. It's an understanding of feeling and understanding of a system. That there could be a system and understanding of historical oppression, like we see within the occupation of the Syrians and the Babylonian captivity, or the current understanding in the New Testament of the Greek occupation with Jesus. There can be long arches of systems of oppression that are formed over history and time. And so justice is always a systematic exercise. Now, sometimes one person is penalized or corrected in the process, But the reality is if that person is experiencing individual correction or penalty, it's because the system is trying to correct itself, right? One person might get the consequences of it, but it's because the whole system is trying to bend back into justice. So justice is ultimately trying to make things right and, dare I say, fair, right? Justice is trying to make a fair system. If someone is unjust or is experiencing injustice, what they desire is a deep correction and a fairness in the system, right? And so they want things to be right, justified, and what God is in faith is God is creating this right, and that right before God is a fair exercise. And again, it's about equity, not equality, and that everybody has the same experience, the same opportunity. It's not like, a lot of times when we talk about justice, it's like, everybody gets the same bottle of water. But if that person comes in here that hasn't been able to have water or lives in a culture in which there's not equal water, but yet I live in a house that I have no problem getting water, equality is everybody still gets the same amount of water. Even the person that has no water in their home or doesn't have safe drinking water, right? Equity says, no, you have water that you have access to. Equity means we pay attention to those who do not have healthy water system and focus on that, right? So that's the difference between equity and equality. Equality wants everybody to have the same amount of water, no matter about your situation or context or position. Equity is trying to bring up those who desire to have or need water and not often giving it to those who already have it, right? That's equity, and that's the difference between those two. So we believe that God desires a just world. Deuteronomy 16, justice and only justice you shall pursue, so that you may live and occupy the land of the Lord has given you. This is such a bold statement in Deuteronomy, that justice and only justice is what the Mosaic statement is here. It's saying you shall pursue, that you look at it. It's an ideal in which you can keep striving for, that you pursue it. And to live and occupy, be a part of this land. This is a Joshua land in which they're celebrating. Moses is seeing the promised land that God is providing and saying, to do that, you have to pursue only justice and live in a fair system. And if you think about it, the original Deuteronomical law is trying to create a just society. Now, over and over again in Deuteronomy, we're not able to do it. But that was the desire of the exilic time that the people were in exile as they started worshiping golden calves and receiving stories from and laws from hills. The whole idea was trying to get the Israelites to live in a just system, to create a just system for themselves. And in Psalm 89, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. So let's go to the next slide here. Let's look at Moses for a second here in justice. So in a horrible act, that is the Pharaoh saying all the baby boys have to go and die, leads to Moses getting in a powerful position, right? He was supposed to die, but he put in the raft, and he goes down the raft and gets picked up by the Pharaoh's daughter. And so this horrible tragedy puts Moses in a powerful position, living literally in the family of power, right? And so he goes from nothing to something. And in this nothing to something, Moses becomes over time completely appalled to the unjust way in which the slaves are being treated. And he chooses, though, after a moment of his own limitations of hurting the soldier and killing the soldier, he leaves the powerful position and goes and becomes a shepherd, right? He leaves the power and the opportunity of that. And as he leaves his powerful position, God mobilizes him with his Hebrew brothers and sisters to be part of an unrest, if you think of it this way, right? Now, God ultimately in the story was the unrester, right? These were the plagues. The plagues provided the unrest of society, right? There was, I'm not going to go through each one of them, but each one of them attacked different aspects of the governmental positions of the Pharaoh. And the economy was affected. Everybody was affected by each one of these plagues. So bad so that the last one was the worst. And no one could get through that unrest, right? And so this unrest of society, God mobilizes with 3 people to try to create a better justice system. So they, with Pharaoh's heart softened, they free people from the unjust system and creates a new order, a more just order to live by. And in the end, because of this liberation, because of the desire of being in good order, they receive that order in the promised land, right? And this actually incredibly fueled a lot of Martin Luther King Jr.'s preaching throughout his time, was this idea that God is still creating and giving to his people a promised land, but is yet to be achieved for Martin Luther King. So this is an act of understanding justice in the world. Moses attacked the system with God's help, creating an unrest that could not be denied. And on the other end, the Israelites, even though they failed, desired and did create a more just system on the other side. Let me talk about mercy for a while. Let's go to the next slide here. So mercy is then the response to a wrong or someone who was wronged, right? Mercy does not care about being fair. Mercy is actually the antithesis of fairness. It's not thinking about what's right or wrong. It's just taking care of someone. Most mercy sees the idea of a need and wants to fill it. They go after the problem on an individual basis and takes the opportunity and does the work to make it better. It's not often care about what is fair. He sees someone who is suffering and you do something, right? So mercy helps. The act of mercy does the helping work of the church. When you see the helping arms of the community who goes to disaster areas, who goes post earthquakes and fires, when we go into places like that, the arms and the helps of the church makes a huge difference when it comes to mercy. Mercy helps, right? So ultimately, you don't desire mercy. It's given to you. Mercy is benevolent, right? It comes from one to the other. It comes from one that has it, has the resource, has the time, has the money, to someone who doesn't have the resource, the time, or the money. Mercy is ultimately benevolent. It's an exchange of sorts, even in a sense of confession, because even if you have wronged me and I'm looking for some form of confession, it's still benevolent. I have to give it or receive it. Someone has it, and one is not having it. Mercy is always on an exchange basis, okay? It's always some form of benevolency. And so acts of mercy is usually a relief of a symptom, relief of a problem, relief from suffering. And it is also a sense of relenting from punishment. So if I'm actually in a position of power, and I'm able to wield some form of consequence on a behavior, like being a parent, maybe. Mercy is also relenting from a punishment or consequences, right? So we also believe that we have a God who is merciful. In Jonah 2, remember this. This is Jonah's on the hill, and he's waiting for Nineveh to be burned to the stake. Remember that? And Jonah's pretty, mad at everything. God is continuing to use Jonah to be merciful to the Ninevites, and Jonah doesn't want to have anything to do with it. And so Jonah on the hillside he prayed to the Lord, "Oh Lord, is not this what I said while I was in my own country? That is why I fled Tarshish at the beginning. For I knew that you are a gracious God, merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, and ready to relent from punishment. Right? Jonah's own voice back to God is God's own identity. Jonah doesn't like it, but that doesn't stop it from being true. And so the relentless mercy of God, the relentless benevolence of God, or in today's passage, the abundance of God's gifts is an act of mercy. Go to the next screen here. So one of the most famous merciful stories in our scripture is the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan is the prime example of a merciful exercise on behalf of God. So the victim has been passed by, right? There's been others that walked by the person on the side of the road who got hurt, and they were passed by, creating an unmerciful experience. Other people failed to show mercy as someone dying on the side of the road, right? Okay? And so there's the victim, and the victim has been passed by and has been beaten. And so the Samaritan acts one-on-one between the victim and themselves. All right? And then the Samaritan uses what they have, benevolent, uses what they have and heals and bandages. And uses what he has, his own resource, right? He brings them in to the inn, sends them to the inn, pays for, I don't know how many, none of us know how long, but pays for his presence to be at the inn, right? And gives this Samaritan a safe temporary housing, right? And so this Samaritan's thought to be this good neighbor, right? This good neighbor for the person. That is the question that Jesus asks after Good Samaritan. So who is the victim's neighbor? And they say the Samaritan, right? So next slide. So let's hold these two together. Let's think of the Samaritan for a second. The Samaritan does not attempt to survey the cause of the highway banditry, right? Right? If you think about it, he just brings them to safe harbor, puts them in there, but he doesn't. So why are people on that road killing people? You know, what does it need more lights? Do we need what is it, right? But the Samaritan does not attempt to survey the causes of the highway banditry. Instead, he provides the much needed immediate relief. On the other hand, Moses does not deal with individual victims of Pharaoh's rule. He confronts the source of the injustice. The Samaritan limits his work to the beaten man and simply resolves the problem with good deeds, while the underlying problem of banditry still seems to remain. Moses, on the other hand, doesn't merely help one person, but it doesn't merely just help one person escape from slavery. Rather, he takes the public action to bring an end to the institution of slavery at the time. Now you see the difference, right? And to know the difference makes a big difference. So go to the next slide. So the distinction may be elementary on some kind of surface, but is often overlooked within our congregational life. Consider possible responses to the problem of poor education in some communities, like basic ability to read and write, right? In the spirit of the Samaritan, a church may decide to respond to this crisis by establishing a tutoring program through the generosity of its members. As a result, 25 kids show remarkable improvement of their test scores. Yet, when the program stops, because sometimes these things don't last forever, the problem still remains. A church may decide to act in the spirit of Moses by recognizing the failures of a school system, maybe, or historical racism, or the classism in the community that may have contributed to these kids' situation. They would organize as a congregation to publicly call and needed changes on the school board and in society and in places around to be more effective, so that we would have a less classist, racist society that will provide more educated young people, right? Now these things, mercy and justice, are often in tension if you think about it. Mercy doesn't care about what is right. Right? Sometimes mercy is against your smart intentions. Right? Sometimes it's against what you're thinking you probably should do, but your heart gets into it and you see the need and you do it, right? Mercy doesn't really care about what's right. Just want to relieve pain, while justice wants to do what is right, even if it might hurt, right? So when justice and mercy collide in this way, I see it often in the church, where we want to just keep doing mercy things, but then sometimes we're like, can we do anything to stop this? Can we actually do any systematic change? Can we do things to go after it? And because one doesn't really care about what's right, but just relieving pain, but one, right is the biggest deal. Doing what's right is the most important, right? And it's part of actually this conversation of being on the screen right now, right? One of the reasons why we encourage you to stay home was trying to do what's right, when the merciful thing would probably be to have everybody here. Right? This is the deep tension between mercy and justice. See, mercy finds temporary solutions that may even prolong injustice. Sometimes if we're not going after the symptoms, like if you take pain relievers, right? And I'm not saying you have not like one of the, not talking about like historical pain, but like I hurt my foot. I could take ibuprofen and just get by until my foot gets better. But I could actually go to the doctor first and then figure out my treatment, right? Most of the time, if I'm just taking the Advil to make the symptoms go away, it doesn't actually fix the foot. And so mercy works that way sometimes. Like one of the best and most popular things during the Christmas season is Christmas boxes. Christmas boxes like Good Samaritan that sends from other countries, that you would send everybody to make these Christmas boxes to send throughout the world, right? And that sounds like, and it makes us feel great to do it, right? You make this box and you do it and you send it over there. But ultimately, if an economy gets inundated with all these boxes for a month, where all these other shopkeepers and stuff like that are actually trying to sell and create an economy, then it completely upsets that whole society for that moment that's trying to create its own just system. Just gets inundated with a bunch of gifts or mercy when they're trying to figure out the whole right kind of way to sell and interact and sell things, right? And the problem with mercy is it's always benevolent. And because of that, it's often top down. And doesn't give the power up, but sustains the power. Well, justice is trying to give up the power by trying to create a just system that might take away from your own power or your own privilege and to create a more just society. But mercy always keeps some kind of power behind because it's a benevolent system. I still have and you don't, right? But justice is deeply often trying to create an equity system in which power is mutually held. Maybe think about voting rights, huh? Think about voting rights right now. If you want to try to keep holding power of who votes or not, that makes voting a benevolent thing, not something we all hold together. I'll get off my soapbox. All right. Mercy is often quick. It's a decision you make and you go after it. Mercy feels good, like a good meal, right? Whenever you be able to give mercy, do an act of mercy, giving feels good. It's an emotional exercise and it feels good. The problem is justice is often slow, difficult, and very confusing, right? And so the exercise of mercy and justice seem to be a tough experience as church. And it's a comparison in which we have to understand. So, if we have a church that does what they think in justice, mercy, and if we can try to actually delineate what we're doing, is this justice or is this mercy, we can better understand what kind of impact we're having. And I'm not saying we stop doing mercy, but if we design it and understand that it's mercy, we understand its limits and its capacity. And if we're not doing justice because we're confused that we think justice is mercy, and we're not doing justice because mercy just feels good and easy, then we've lost the duality of the tension. We've lost the idea that we should actually be doing justice and doing justice-like things. Because mercy can just make us feel good and fill that void within us. But then we don't always get to the justice aspect of changing and being a part of a system. So doing justice work in a church like ours always has been difficult, because we have hardly ever been in positions of injustice. So ultimately, we are called to be a church that's not just merciful, not just a merciful, benevolent experience. We want to be a church that is empowering, that takes down systems that don't function for ourselves and others, to give up our benevolent understanding into a spirit of equity that God has given us. And in that understanding, we then actually practice justice. We practice being a more just system ourselves and more just system for our neighbors.